everyone from ASHE, and I would also like to thank our colleagues Jenny Hirsch and Meghna Tare for also leading this among our RCE Americas network. I have great respect for all of you, and very excited to be able to present our work today and share it with our friends from Shenandoah and see them again. I am going to share our screen, and Anthony, and when Samuel gets here, I can drive for us. Just tell me next slide, and hopefully, let's see. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, perfect.
Great. So again, my name is Pam Martin. I'm the executive director of our RCE, Georgetown, South Carolina. At our university, our RCE runs through the RISE Center, and RISE stands for Advancing Resilience, Innovation, Sustainability, and Sustainability through Education. We work in Georgetown County and throughout South Carolina. Of course, I should thank the UN University, in particular, Philip Vaughter and his leadership of the RCE centers across the world. And our RCE is generously sponsored by various local community partners, those being the Francis P. Bunnell Foundation. We'll talk about the Youth Corps we run with them. Sustain SC, a nonprofit in South Carolina, unifying commerce and conservation organizations. We partner with the North Inlet Winyah Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve and rely on them heavily for scientific data. We have recently partnered with 6 Axis Manufacturing to sponsor work in our nonprofits in the community. And of course, we are housed at Coastal Carolina University. Our RCE stands on 3 pillars. Obviously, by this point, the title of our series is Localizing the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And the way that we localize at Coastal Carolina University and RCE Georgetown, South Carolina, we localize those goals through 3 pillars. Community engaged research, our paid Youth Corps internship program, which I will talk about in a little bit, and our Sustainable Development Goal study in South Carolina, which I will not get to, but again, want to highlight and thank the stellar work of Sustain SC, working with our industries and our conservation groups in South Carolina to create a sustainable and resilient future in South Carolina. My colleague is here, and you see his name on the screen, Anthony Satari, who will be speaking in just a little bit. He's our data analytics coordinator for our center. And our colleague from the Coastal Community Foundation, Samuel Bellamy, will be here to talk about a project that we have partnered with them on as well. And I know you've seen this map before if you've been attending these, but I want to point out that Georgetown is over on the East Coast of the United States, and we're not so far from Atlanta and Shenandoah, and we're kind of like in the middle of both of you, actually. And so we are on the East Coast. We're the only one on the Southeast Coast in the RCE of the Americas network. And so we are very focused on coastal resilience. And with that, I want to talk a little bit, focusing, my part of this presentation is going to be focusing on 2 aspects of our community engaged research and our Youth Corps internship program. And the first aspect of this is our Sustainability Methods and Tools class that we have integrated with our Localizing the SDGs work. A community that is along the ocean side, along the East Coast in Murrells Inlet, South Carolina, has asked us to do a sustainability assessment 2 years in a row. You can see that this community is along the Atlantic Ocean with beautiful saltwater marshes and wetlands and seagrasses, etc. And then also you can see the water sports sign, which is sort of the paradox of development in our beautiful coastal area. I should say that Georgetown County, if I actually go back to the map there, we are sandwiched, if you don't know where we are, because we're geographically, we're a relatively large county, but in terms of population, we're only just under 65,000 people in total. What is unique about our county is that we have 5 rivers that flow into the 3rd largest water basin along the east coast of the United States called the Winyah Bay. Anytime anyone says third, I always wonder what's one and two. So one is the Chesapeake and two is the Pamlico Albemarle Sound, just north of us, and then us on the Winyah Bay. Also unique, a colleague of ours, Dan Abel, does a lot of work with breeding areas for sharks. And we are a particular breeding area for sharks. We have a very rich biodiversity of flora and fauna. And we have unique cultural history of the Gullah Geechee peoples, which are descendants, ancestors of West African slaves and Caribbean slaves who came to the United States, have a unique culture, language, and heritage. We are also sandwiched between two of the largest growing areas in the United States. That's Charleston, South Carolina, continuously on the cover of Condé Nast Traveler, you may have seen, and Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And so with that, I preface that by saying this lovely community, Murrells Inlet, is a tourist town, but historically has been a fishing village and has been experiencing the complex aspects of growth and development, yet completely nested within a beautiful estuary. And so they came to the Rise Center asking, could we do a sustainability assessment? Also because community members are a part of our RCE and know what we do. So I thought a little bit about it, and I thought, gosh, there's a lot of goals, there's a lot of data. The community is an unincorporated area of Georgetown County, which means that its representation has essentially one county council person on the county council and no other representation. It doesn't have a smaller town council, et cetera, in order to be able to focus on this area for a sustainability assessment. And if any of, and all of you who attend these things understand that each biodiverse area has its own unique environmental, ecological system, cultural system, et cetera. And so with that, we embedded the Murrells Inlet Sustainability Assessment into our class of our methods and tools for sustainability and coastal resilience class. The first year we had 15 students, and the second year we had 30 students. And for those of you that are teaching faculty and or research faculty, I present this to you as a means of both conducting active methodology in a class and actively engaged research. For this project, we also partnered with our colleagues in the Marine Science and Marine Geology program, and we partnered with the Sea Grant Consortium. But my own personal research is on ecological jurisprudence and rights of nature, and essentially nesting our sustainability approaches within ecology. And so the students and I created a model that really is modeled after the Intergovernmental Panel of Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services through the United Nations, as well as ecological jurisprudence, looking at the planetary boundaries first of a place and nesting the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, on top of it. We did this through a process of deep listening and embedding in the community in the beginning of the semester, having focus group sessions and individual interviews. This is over a two semester time period, essentially, fall of 21 and fall of 22. We produced reports each year, and our knowledge grew with each experience. But there you can see, after doing some scientific research of publicly available data, and then in the second year, some unique data that was collected by our colleagues and our students, nesting it within nature and then relating the Sustainable Development Goals to that process, running collaboration and partnerships for the goals 17 through everything. As I mentioned, this is not only a unique ecologically unique place, but it's also a place that has a lot of restaurants and bars and tourist destinations. So the economy is something that also has to be worked through this model. So we created a systems level approach, and we measured, we chose some of the targets within those goals, and we measured through some of those targets. And this is just an example of how we measured. We did goal 15, life on land, and we chose change in forest coverage. And on the top, you can see 2001, and on the bottom, you can see 2019. This is done with GIS mapping. So Again, this is a class of methodology and tools, so you can use a sustainability assessment to actually have students use the tools, not just study the tools, and produce something that's very useful for and needed for a community that may not have the resources or time to do this themselves. And you can see in 2019, there's quite a bit of difference in landmass and development change there. And so here's just another community. So I divided the class in two, and this is a very different community. There's the names of our students that from the first year. And I put their names there because this group actually won the Outstanding Flagship Award for Education for Sustainable Development through the UN RCE system. So I wanted to point out that those are the students that deserve that credit. And this is so the first town, Murrells Inlet, I gave you a little sampling of, is on the ocean side, East Coast. Salt Marsh. This is an inland town, okay, and it is in Horry County, which is the county just north of where the other town was, and it is a riverine town. In fact, Bucksport's history, it was buck plantation, and most of the people that live, Gullah people that live in Bucksport, are slave descendants of that plantation. It's a very historical, very rich Gullah community with an incredible amount of local knowledge and connection to the land and the heritage and the culture and the language. We had the privilege of working here. So after listening to this community, particularly I want to highlight the Association for the Betterment of Bucksport and Kevin and Gina Mishu, their fearless leaders, along with their board. The students created a systems level approach as well, but one that's a little bit different. One that really takes climate change and reducing poverty sort of as the primary axes, and then includes a sustainable city and community all the way down to reducing inequalities, as you can see on the vertical, and then aligning life on land, clean water, good health and well-being, and collaboration and partnerships. I'm using this report. We did similar methodologies and tools in both, but I wanted to focus on this one in particular because we use some new tools that may be exciting, or it was exciting to me. And I will first preface this by saying, we're talking about in this session, how do you localize the goals? Well, for me, it's about learning from my colleagues. And the first thing I did is I reached out to the Sea Grant Consortium, an environmental engineer named Katie Finnegan, to say, Katie, the Sea Grant does this type of work all the time. What type of tools do you recommend? And she recommended, obviously I knew GIS, but ArcGIS Survey 123. So in addition to using publicly available data to measure the targets and specific localized indicators, we also created we focused on citizen knowledge and local knowledge, which we know that that's a critical component of sustainable development. And the first thing that we found out, and I should call out that my colleague Dr. Jamie McCauley was so not only did I do this in a class, but I also partnered with a colleague in her class on the Bucksport project. So this had a lot of moving parts to it. It was a lot of fun. Jamie's students wanted to measure a lot of times in coastal communities, especially Gullah communities or marginalized communities. There's a sense that when there's a buyout program for hazard mitigation when there's hazard mitigation funds that can support a buyout program, often the first communities that are affected are those that are voiceless and marginalized, and then they get bought out and they don't have a chance to protect their land. An intervening variable of this is that there's heirs property in southern states, and that heirs property is property inherited after the Civil War by slave descendants, and that property, because of obvious massive distrust of the government, there was never deeds filed in many of those cases, or wills. And so now there are multiple generations of people living on land that doesn't have a legal deed or will to it. This creates a lot of problems when you have, in our case, starting in 2015, as you'll see, just year after year of floods and damage from storms, people can't get Federal Emergency Management Agency funds, FEMA funds, to rebuild. But we first wanted to establish that there are multiple generations, and you can see the blue side, the right side of my screen, the blue is 5 generations or more of people live in Bucksport. And you can see there that they're very attached to Bucksport. We wanted to establish this as data for the community. I'll also say the most exciting and I would say important thing to me when teaching this class is that our students embedded with the community, we did a litter pickup with the community. We got to know the community members of all ages. And so this isn't just some assessment where we come in and we detach, we immerse. And here's an example. We choose a goal like goal 15, life on land, and then we choose 2 targets and we talk about deforestation, let's say, and biodiversity. And there you can see the indicators for that, changes in forest coverage, endangered species. And so we localize the SDGs by choosing targets that we know are measurable. And so here's an example using Google Earth Plus and some GIS mapping. We have pointed out a 30% total area of deforestation. This is a community that is suffering tremendously from flooding. And what is also very important is that this community they discovered that there is a slave cemetery in the community that had been flooded over. And they want to protect this. This is a heritage site, not just for the community, although very much for the community, but for the entire country. This is a part of our history and heritage. And so we were very, very intent on making sure that we demonstrated that the flood areas and where it needed to be protected, so that we could also try and point out where the cemetery is and preserve it. We also did a soil analysis, and you can see that they're obviously important for drainage for flooding. And then you can see goal 14 and the targets that we chose, 14.2 and 14.7. And then you can see our loss of wetland, and the Waccamaw National Wildlife Refuge also buttresses this community. It's a wonderful, wonderful refuge that we have as a gift. And it acts as a huge floodplain for all of us along the river. But it also is home to some of our biodiversity, as you can see there, striped bass and shad and herring and endangered sturgeon species, etc. Then you can see that we used NOAA data to point out where there were wetland losses. And then again, we did the ArcGIS survey, 1, 2, 3, and we were talking about the community. Again, all of the selection of these goals and targets were after copious note-taking and very detailed conversations with community members on what they wanted assessed. This was very much a process with the community, directed by the community, I should point out, not by us. And by no means did we consider ourselves experts, but rather partners, providing some resources. In what you can see there is, if repairs were necessary after a flood, what was the amount? And there you can see that in a large percentage of the cases, it was easily over $1,000, in many cases over $5,000. And then at the same time, you can see the percentage of people that don't have flood insurance, a very high percentage. This, by the way, was a similar percentage in Murrells Inlet. Now, the socio-demographics of both of these places are very different. The income is much higher along the ocean side in Murrells Inlet than it is in Bucksport. Bucksport has very high percentage of poverty rate. But even still, very low flood insurance for a place that we know has been experiencing flooding. And have you had to make repairs from the flooding? And how were your expenses covered? And there you can see most people are paying for the expenses out of pocket. Now, after some interviews, we surmised that many times expenses were paid for out of pocket because of the variable of heirs property and inability to access federal funds to cover that. And there you can see that a majority of people are experiencing flooding after 2015. We wanted to establish that this flooding hadn't always been happening, which is what the community was telling their county, Horry County, that something had changed. And what had changed, we were trying to establish, is that there had been land that had been deforested. There you can see the flood hazard maps. And then we had very important aspect of this is community members told us that they know better than anyone where there is flooding in their community. And so they wanted to document. As you can see, Bucksport is a small community. It has under 1,200 people in the community. It's not a very large community, and it is represented by one county council member on county council. Horry County has Myrtle Beach in it. It's as things are in South Carolina, it's a wealthier county than say Georgetown County, but Bucksport didn't have its own voice of governance, doesn't have a town council. And so the people they wanted the county offices and state offices to know their local knowledge. So you can see we had an evening event where we had a community event where we offered various information and food, et cetera, to community members in their community center. We asked people to put little tacks on the areas of where they've seen flooding. And there you can see the green means one flooding event all the way up to the red, 4 events or more. And there's a pretty significant, there's a few areas of red and a few areas of blue. And these areas are a little bit different than areas that had been identified in formal flooding maps, because these areas, when you do GIS mapping via census zip code, it's not granular enough to capture these small local communities. And that was what we were trying to achieve. So you may be saying to yourself, who cares? Why was this important? Well, in both instances, and what we are finding, again, South Carolina is a rural state, communities matter. We are a state of deep, rich, historical, and diverse communities. And these communities have smart voices that they want heard. And there's funding out there. Our state has resilience plan that is mandated for counties, but as I just mentioned to you, a lot of the data is too macro to capture the micro experiences of small towns and villages and like Bucksport and Murrells Inlet. Well, you had some great, I'm very proud of the success driven by the community in Bucksport. We have a coalition of over 30 organizations, including the Nature Conservancy, Open Space Institute, Southern Environmental Law Center, et cetera, that is working with the community. We captured the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation Resilience Grant funding of $250,000 last year, American Rescue Plan funds, a Google Digital Grant, and a Sustained Coastal Grant, to which Anthony is a part of as well. And so just this ability to capture data and create a sustainability assessment has helped us be able to then use that data to apply for grants and isolate areas that the community wants to focus on. Similarly, in Murrells Inlet, Our Marsh Counts is a litter collection project with the South Carolina Aquarium, led by Preserve Murrells Inlet and Murrells Inlet 2020, 2 organizations there. And they also apply for a Sea Grant of $200,000, and they're coming out with a documentary film that I did not add, but I should have. So that's one project. And the last project that I will talk about and then move to Anthony and Samuel is we're very proud of our now 6 years of collaboration with the Francis P. Bunnell Foundation and our Youth Corps. It runs spring and summer, and this is something from 2022. We currently have interns. We just had our dinner last night with county council officials. But our Youth Corps this is our presentations from August, and there's our bright and chipper future. Our Youth Corps is composed from anywhere from 35 to 45 students each year. And it's an economic development grant through the Bunnell Foundation. They have paid internships of $15 an hour in public and private organizations. In the spring, they work 15 to 20 hours, and in the summer, they work 37.5 hours. They're employees of our university, supervised by their various sites. Those sites include county offices like planning and economic development, public works for engineers, for example, as well as private law firms, medical practices, engineering firms, a cybersecurity firm. So it encompasses what education for sustainable development rather, should encompass. It is the thread through which all careers should be connected. Students intern in these positions, and then they also take a class in which they analyze what they are doing, the projects they're working on, through the lens and optic of measuring the sustainable development goals, and then providing a report. That was their presentations of their report, to demonstrate how their institution, their internship institution, is contributing to a more sustainable community. And then that report also includes comparative analysis of best practices, recommendations for the future. And if reports receive an A or higher, students are given the opportunity to edit those reports and then upload them to a digital library that is publicly available for everyone in the county. Here you can see that we have about 17 interns in the spring last year and 20 in the summer. We have minority groups that are 43% and 28%. So we're really looking at it through an equity lens. Majority are juniors and seniors. The interesting thing is 50% are from South Carolina and 50% are not. And somewhere between 30 and 40% last year were offered employment. This year we're looking at 60%, which is exciting. So students stay in the county. And they also discover the beauty of a county that is just south of the university. So we also immerse the students. They do service learning activities. We look, the pictures that you will see there underneath the trees there are at Hasty Point Plantation at the Waccamaw National Wildlife Refuge, which was a former plantation, which is now part of the refuge. We had a talk by Zenobia Harper, who is a Gullah artist and historian. And then you can see on the top right, we were kayaking in the Black River Cypress Preserve to discover the black waters of and the tannin waters of the Black River, and that Black River is a very special place. They're turning it into a state park, in fact. And the students, their reports, for example, we had a student work for a cybersecurity firm, and she reported on remote work and how that relates to the goals and economic development for the county. And there you can see her work. So students isolate goals, and then they isolate targets, and they do an analysis. And we had another student do culturally embedded STEM and education curricula with the Plantersville Village Group Summer Academy. They again choose the goals and they isolate data. And at the end of the experience, we measure the goals that we have worked on throughout the semester. And there you can see the organizations with whom we have worked and the goals that we touched, just to get a quick glance at what are we working on and what are we missing, so that we turn around and think about that in the future. Then there's our mapping from last year. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Anthony Satari and Mr. Samuel Bellamy. Anthony is the data analytics coordinator for the RISE Center. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. I'm very glad to be here with you all today. Thank you, Pam and Samuel, for your hard work, and especially thank you to the Coastal Community Foundation for sponsoring this project. We're actually going to start with Samuel telling us kind of the overarching goals and kind of the aims of the Coastal Community Foundation with its work, and then I'm going to dig into some of the specifics about this project and some of the really powerful things that have come out of it and where we're kind of aiming to head with it, and where someone hoping to replicate this process can possibly take it into the future with their own organization. So Samuel, I'll turn it over to you for now.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Satari and Dr. Martin. So my name is Samuel Bellamy. I am a program officer with the Coastal Community Foundation located in Charleston, South Carolina. So the Coastal Community Foundation, we are the largest community foundation in South Carolina. We currently manage over 700 different funds from established individuals and families, organizations, and we award tens of millions of dollars in grants and scholarships each year. mainly through endowed funds, so donor advised funds. So we partnered with Dr. Martin and Dr. Cesari on a data dashboard project. That's the name that we've given it. I'm sure our Marcom team will come up with a new name that sounds more catchy and more marketable in a few. But we wanted a dashboard that mirrored some of the areas in which the foundation funds and donates money. So during our feasibility study and strategic planning process, we really tested a couple of different components that we hoped would match up with the Sustainable Development Goals. From that strategic planning process, we came up with 5 areas: education, economic mobility, culture, equity, and inclusion or identity, coastal resilience, physical health and mental well-being, and family philanthropy. So from there, what we did is we heard from Dr. Cesari and Dr. Martin about the SDGs, targets, and some different indicators that could line up with where our focus was as a foundation. And from that, we came up with about eight different goals, SDG goals that we wanted to target. So goal number 1 was the no poverty. Goal number 2 was zero hunger. Goal 3 was health and well-being. Goal 4, quality education. And goal 8, decent work and economic growth. We also identified sustainable cities and communities and climate change. So you might be asking, like, why would we do that? So for us, we believe that data in and of itself is a combination of expert knowledge and community knowledge. And for us, we use data to help provide the framework for storytelling and some narrative shaping. So our goal was really to make data easy to understand and accessible for not only our community partners, our nonprofits that we're working with, but also individuals who wanted to establish funds with the community foundation. So we use data as a tool for grant makers to help them make decisions about where and how to invest in our area. So like Dr. Martin mentioned earlier, with her process, we also had a community conversation. We had a series of community conversations with community leaders in the community, just to get their feedback on what indicators they looked at or what data points they needed to see before they made a decision about where to invest, what organizations to start, what organizations or what region of the area that we were serving they needed to be a part of. So we looked at a regional dashboard. We partnered with Trident United Ways and some other community foundations in the area just to get their feedback as well about what data they might be looking for, because we wanted to make sure that whatever product that was created was something that could be used from a variety of different angles, different organizations. We wanted to really make sure that it was something that represented the region well. So we came up with a dashboard project that Dr. Cesari and Dr. Martin helped us put together. We pulled in a lot of local data sources, and Dr. Cesari really did a great job of synthesizing the data and putting it in a way that was digestible. Our job now as a foundation, because we're still working through this process, is really to make sure that we are not only training people how to use the data that they're receiving from the dashboard, but also make sure that it tells the story that we want it to tell. Because we know, data by itself is just that. It's just data. It's not until the data is combined with local knowledge and local experts that it begins to form an important story in which you can make decisions off of. So with the help of Dr. Cesari, we were able to again, put all this information in one neat and tidy place so that organizations can come and view by region some of the target areas that I mentioned earlier. We also will plan on using this dashboard to, again, engage potential donor advisors on where the gaps are, what areas need to be looked at, where we're improving based off of where funding is going. How do we get the most out of the investment? How do we tell that story? How do we tell that narrative? And how do we really help a region really move past where they are, where they're starting, getting them from point A to point B. And there are a lot of details in between. I will pass it over to Dr. Satari. I had 2 slides. I should have told you to move some slides forward, but I'll pass it to you, Dr. Satari, to give kind of the nuts and bolts of the project that you helped us work out.
Great. Thank you, Samuel. I appreciate that overview of all the detail and all the work that went into just the foundational components of building out something like this. Dr. Martin, if you can skip a few slides ahead to the first one, the dashboard.
Oh, sorry, Samuel. I didn't realize you wanted me to switch slides. I apologize.
No, I think that was my fault. I should have told you to move slides. It's okay.
So we're actually not going to be showing you the dashboard today. Right now, it's currently under embargo as we work with CCF to make sure that it is a artifact and something that goes out to the community and really reflects on CCF in a really powerful way, by making sure it's aligns to their Marcom standards and their language. And I note that because it's actually really important to think of data and the SDGs not as something that is adjacent to like the work of an org of CCF. It is by doing a project like this becoming a core part of what they do. And this is part of that fusing of this SDG world with this organization's world. And I really think it's a powerful thing to continue to think of organizations as they build that out and, encouraging them to take that time to, be intentional with those decisions. So to give you some context for this, what's actually included in here, what we did was for each of the CCF goals that we selected, that were identified, we aligned the SDGs that worked for each given goal as best we could in terms of what was appropriate and what felt right. Are there certain SDGs that could fit in 2 categories? Yeah, but we chose the one that felt like it was the most organically appropriate for certain ones. And then for that SDG, we identified a series of data. So essentially we worked our way down from goal to SDG to data within itself. So from there, we can now look at the goals, the SDGs, but then within this data, we had it broken down vis-a-vis county. So for each of these goals with their SDGs, we could look at county outcomes, and we actually had the opportunity to make cross comparisons for counties and then do a deeper dive within a given county. And within that deep dive within counties, Pam, if you can go to the next slide, please. We provided a wealth of data to give some context for the 10 counties we have on our dashboard. We have over 1,000 pieces of data that you can engage with. Now, this is really important because it's reliable, trustworthy, solid data. Oftentimes organizations, when we are thinking about what data do we want to pull from, where do we go, smaller organizations don't know where to get what they need. They're not familiar with the data process, so they'll kind of grab whatever, and often they're not grabbing the best sources. So this dashboard relies on very trustworthy sources and data from FEMA, the US Census, Kids Count, other kind of local agencies. We did some data collection for less common things that are kind of collected at a bigger level, but this is really trustworthy data that you could take and make decisions off of, which is important because we want to make sure that folks are using good data and they feel confident in the data, and that CCF is putting forth and putting out data that is good data. We organized it in a way that really allowed for ease of communication. So we used a lot of graphs, maps, visuals, and that's important because our users are going to come from a range of areas. So while the internal CCF team, they probably had professional development and engage in data in a daily basis, your local organizations that might be actually using this dashboard to do some decision making, which we'll talk about in just a minute, they're not going to have the same level of data literacy. So it's really important that when we have this good data, we're really bringing it to them in a way that speaks to them. And we did that vis-a-vis our Tableau dashboard, and really taking advantage of all the intricate kind of options you have in a system like that. So Pam, if you go to the next slide. So this is kind of really the key here. So what do I actually do with this? Well, a dashboard like this really supports the internal and the external decision-making processes. So when we are thinking about decision-making, as I said before, having reliable data is really important, particularly if our external organizations that may not have access to it. But it's really telling the external organizations that work with CCF that this is the data that is valuable to them. This is the data that they should be using to drive their decision making. We often get caught in local organizations, we get caught, using anecdotes or bits of outdated information. But by putting this forth, CCF is saying this data is really important. So if you want to apply for a grant or you want to do some other sort of work with us, this is probably the data you should be justifying those decisions on. This is really the data you want to be pulling from to, build that partnership out and really to direct your own work. And for a granting agency like CCF, that's really powerful. It really does also provide a strategic planning marker, again, internally and externally, that can be done, that can be used as part of the decision-making process for strategic planning, but it also provides a means for us to evaluate later on, because we have these data baselines that we can look back on and say, this is the decision we made, this is the strategic plan we made based on this data. How has our work in these areas, whether it be internal or external, impacted this area? Because that's really what we want to do with grants, and a lot of the other work we do is see that impact, and having the data to do it is really powerful. Beyond that, one last thing, Pam, if you can go back. It communicates that the SDGs are important and relevant to the organization. And again, as I mentioned before, fusing that and showing that the SDGs are important to this bigger organization. And as these smaller orgs get on board, it should be important to them as well. They really want to adopt it. Now we can go forward, Pam. Thank you. So last slide I have for you. The exciting thing about doing this as a dashboard is it really does have the potential to evolve and change over time, because we can update them rather easily when you have the skill set to do so. So as the org changes, as the focus changes, we can add new data. We can examine change in time of data as data has changed over time. We can focus on new priorities and add new data and pull some things away, and really allow it to morph and bend to the needs of CCF. And particularly for a dashboard like this, what's exciting is we can add new SDGs. There's many SDGs, as you all know, and we selected only a few, but as CCF's priorities and needs and desires change for their work, and just the nature of where they're heading, we can add and subtract and take away and build out, and really build something powerful that says, yes, the SDGs are vital to this org, to their work, and this is what they're doing to address them, and here's what we're saying about that. So Pam, I'll turn it back over to you to round it out.
I just wanted to say that I want to compliment Anthony and his team, also Dr. Michelle Zarenda at the RISE Center and our RCE. Anthony's work on data collection has resulted in he and Dr. Zarenda did a food insecurity project in Georgetown County, which resulted in a Feed Georgetown. We also did a dashboard for Georgetown County measuring the Sustainable Development Goals. And there's a link here on this slide, and we have sent our slides to the organizers of this as well for our center. And those publicly available dashboards in Tableau are also at our website. So it creates accountability and transparency, but also transformation in our community. And with that, I want to say thank you. And we are exactly at 2:45, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go back to, we thought we would leave just some time for our participants, our viewers, to ask us questions. I am a professor at Coastal Carolina. Anthony is too. We're in two differing fields. He's data analytics and education. I'm political science and sustainability. And Samuel is with a community foundation. So Please, if you have questions, we would love to engage your questions or comments or suggestions. Well, we can always answer them. There may be some in the chat, actually. I haven't even been keeping up with the chat. Yes, I see the grants. Thank you for the climate grants. Okay, well, if there are no
Pam,
questions, oh,
Pam,
hey, Steve.
Sorry, I was trying to find the hand raising thing and I couldn't find it. So this is Steve Grandy. I mean, we'll be talking in a few minutes from RCE Shenandoah Valley, but this is a question for you all. But just to kind of preface it, one of the real advantages about being an RCE is the opportunity to then have interaction with other regional centers of expertise. And so every time I get to hear from Pam and now getting to meet your colleagues too, it's just, I'm always just super impressed. And one of the things that I'm always curious about, I always ask Pam, like, how do you do it all? How do you do all this? And so I guess I have kind of a double question. One is like, what role does the RCE play? Like, how does that facilitate or help in any way if it does? And then the other part of that is like, what is your like structure? Like, how have you made it this far to do this really broad and inspiring work?
Gosh, Steve, thanks. That's why I love seeing you. Make me feel better. Okay, so the RCE has been critical. In 2016, when Georgetown County, I went to Georgetown County Public and Private Leaders. The university provost, I don't think actually he was the provost at the time. He is our provost now, but I think he was our dean, reached out to me with the director of global engagement at our university and said, hey, there's this conference on sustainability in Germany and internationalizing it, you should go. And I was like, oh, okay. But then I said, well, you know, there's this other conference and it's not so far, it's more sustainable and it's closer and it has a UN workshop attached to it. Looks interesting. So I went to that and it was Philip Vaughter, who is our fellow that unites all of the RCEs in the Americas. And he gave a presentation with Kim Smith from Portland on RCE. And I thought, wow, university is part of community, because that's really sort of what I think sustainable development has to be. That's the role of our university, particularly coastal. Our history is one, we were founded by local people in our community. So I applied with the county, with our Council of Government. They were a huge help in helping me collect data and write the grant. The Bunnell Foundation sponsored a workshop of 45 people with lunch included, public and private leaders. And at the end, I said, okay, I mean, are you guys in? Do you want to have this type of center? Because my university president was there. So I got buy-in from the whole kit and caboodle from top down. And I was like, because I'm not going to get a pay raise, assuredly, because my president was there. So do you want to do this? And everyone was like, yes, we should do this. So when we got the designation as an RCE, it wasn't my success, it was the community's success, because the community had already bought in. And my biggest, then it's like, okay, it's like everybody else. Okay, you get it. Now it's like, oh, what the heck am I going to do now? You know? And that was when I thought about the internship program, because I thought, okay, the county buttresses the county in which the university is, but it takes about an hour or half hour to hour to drive from the campus to some of the, you know, to some places in the county. So you have to pay students. And then I thought, well, you know, students need internships, and every career should be measuring sustainability, not just sustainability. So, you know, I thought about, can we have paid internships and measure the goals? And that's really, once I embedded students in the community, it all just started snowballing. Because they were there and they could be there because they were being paid. And we partnered with Habitat for Humanity for their housing. And it's really been fantastic. But honestly, Steve, it was sort of serendipitous and circuitous. And my goal was, if I'm a tenure track professor, right? And my colleagues like Anthony are tenure track professors. We have about 5 or 6 other grants working with our Office of Resilience. Anthony is on that one too. And my goal is, we all know that we're already doing a lot of work, especially COVID and now the aftermaths of COVID. I want to pay faculty. So I'm the director that wants to pay you. I want to pay faculty to do this work. I want to pay students to do that work. And I want it to be equitable so that they have the time to give them course releases. They have the time to engage in this, so that it becomes part of our work, that we are truly embedded in the community because we're being compensated to do so. And people like Samuel and the Coastal Community Foundation have been big supporters of this, and it really can transform the lives of our faculty members and our students. So I do it with passion, and I do it because I have a team of faculty members and an entire Office of Sustainability and an administration that is super supportive.
Thanks, Pam. That's a real helpful answer in multiple ways. While I'm talking, I'll just mention there was also a question in the Q&A button down below. I don't know if you see that or not.
Oh, let's see. Oh, sometimes people don't know what you don't know. How do you outreach, assist groups in using dashboards? Oh, I'm going to let Anthony take that. He's the guru of using dashboards.
I'm actually not seeing this question. What was that question?
It's in the Q&A, and it says, I'll read it for you. Sometimes people don't know what you don't know. How do you outreach, assist groups in using dashboards effectively for their work?
Yeah, so I would say that that's a great question. I think that a lot of this is about kind of letting it be an organic process that takes the time it needs to take. So, a lot of our work started from, we were reached out to by the Baskerville Food Pantry to help them locate food resources in the community. And it seemed like a good opportunity for us to build out a dashboard and, to really make it clear this is a community resource and something that could be really powerful. It was a really small grant. But it was a great entrance into the community and a great way to show the community the power of what could be done. And from there, over just the last month, I've had 2 phone calls with organizations who want us to build out new projects and new dashboards for them, and really just allowing it to organically grow and really show them what can be done with it. But I always say this because it's true with dashboards particularly. You can't just hand something like that over and hope that it's going to take, it's gonna do what it needs to do and, be as powerful as it could be. I think what you really need to do is make sure that when you have a dashboard that goes out to the community, you walk with the organization through its next steps. So as Dr. Martin mentioned before, our work with the food pantry has turned into a whole food initiative in the county, based on this work, based on this dashboard. And now we're talking about updating it to include new resources as it's kind of grown through there. So it's simply just been a very organic process, and really encourage, working with folks where they are and, finding those opportunities to really embed these ideas and support them as they figure out ways to embed it into their work has really been what's so powerful. And that's kind of one of the exciting things about working with CCF right now, because they have such a wide network, such a powerful impact in the community. It's exciting to be at this point where we can really work with them and build out and see it kind of embed itself into the community in a really neat way.
I'll also add, there's another I tend to be very practical, mostly because the center runs as a small business and I have to fund it. So I'm not sitting on a lot of flush funds. There's something very practical about measuring the SDGs. As it turns out, 76% of the companies in South Carolina also measure the SDGs. That's because many of them are from outside the US and they have nationally determined reports that they're doing for their countries. And so if you look at the sustainability reports of the companies in your states, you'll probably see the same thing. And so it's helpful for nonprofits to be able to align with the SDGs and then demonstrate to the companies in their area how they are aligning with similar goals so that they can work together, they can join and get resources, et cetera. that's very practical, but it's also about multi-stakeholder transformation in communities. So. Okay, Shenandoah friends, you are on.
Great. Should we just launch right in, Daita, or do you want us to pause for a moment?
If it's okay to maybe wait until the top of the hour and give people a couple of minutes to, yes, drink, refresh, replenish, all of that stuff, that would be great. Thank you. So we'll get started at the top of the hour.
RCE Georgetown for that very rich and intriguing presentation. Thank you guys so much. I know that we all learned a great deal. I also want to echo Pam's thanks to ASHE and the RCE network for putting this course together. We're moving on up the East Coast now to the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. My name is Carolina Miller, and I am the Environment and Sustainability Associate at James Madison University in the College of Integrated Science and Engineering. I'll be one of your facilitators for the next hour. One of the first things we're going to do, I'm going to put a link in the chat. There you go, and that should take you to a Jamboard. I invite you to go to that link and the Jamboard and just tell us your name, organization, and email. You can grab a sticky note over there on the left side of the Jamboard. And on that sticky note, put your name, organization, and email. That will give us an idea of who's with us today, from where you are and who you are. And if you like, you can align your name with a particular SDG on that screen that is of particular interest to you. Thanks, I see them popping up there. Oh, it's so cool to watch to watch them fly all over the SDG map. While you're doing that, I'll ask my colleague Steve to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for this opportunity and for everyone for being here today. My name is Steve Grandy, and I work really closely with Carolina at James Madison University, but particularly with the Sustainable Shenandoah Valley, which Carolina will be talking about, our regional center of expertise in just a moment. And so my role is as coordinator or chair, or just try to keep things going, I think is really the title. And so I look forward to talking with you more as the afternoon or evening or morning goes on for you.
Thank you, Steve. And thanks, it's just really good to see your names and institutions here on the screen. Yeah, I love seeing the variety of places that we're all coming together from today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for the PowerPoint. And you all can see that okay? Okay, good. So as we mentioned, we are here as part of the Sustainable Shenandoah Valley RCE. We will have several speakers coming to you today, but first I'm going to just do a brief presentation of Sustainable Shenandoah Valley. We were established in 2013, and we are a collaboration of regional institutions of higher education. Those colleges are traveling north to south in the central Shenandoah Valley. They are Mary Baldwin University, Blue Ridge Community College, Bridgewater College, James Madison University, and Eastern Mennonite University. Recently, we've been focusing primarily on education of the Sustainable Development Goals in courses at our institutions, as well as through student leadership and community events that promote collaboration and networking. Today, we're going to start out with letting two of our student leaders speak to you. They're going to talk about annual events that are sponsored by our RCE, but these events are planned and led by our students. Following that, two faculty members will briefly present their work concerning SDG integration into their curriculum. And then we hope to leave plenty of time for engagement with our speakers and for your questions. Before we do that, we do have a brief poll for you. See if Data, can you initiate that poll?
Or Carolina, would you like me to,
Yes.
all right, you got it, Data?
I'll do it.
I can't see where to do it while I'm sharing the screen, Steve. There we go. Okay, so hopefully you see the poll there. It says, to what degree do students on your campus currently engage with community members and partners around the Sustainable Development Goals?
Okay, we'll wait a little bit more so that more of our participants have a chance to pick something. Oh, it's being shared. Sorry.
Oh, did everybody get a chance? Well,
We also had a
I don't
question.
think so, Steve.
it's okay.
We had a question in the chat, if you can hear me, whether or not we're talking about students engaging knowingly or whether it's engaging with like the specific.
We could restart the
SDGs.
poll.
Let's restart it, but it's a good question. Just, yeah, it might be intentionally, or it might be that a student was working on a particular SDG unknowingly. And I think since this poll is not meant to be scientific, it's more of just trying to get a sense of what are the experiences out there. Let's go with just in any way that you're aware that students are engaging, and hopefully at some point, whether it's perhaps even after they've done it, they find out that they were connecting somehow to the SDGs.
Yeah, we're getting to quite a few responses now. It looks like most people are in the middle.
Yeah, I'm gonna end and share.
Okay.
So it's 62% are sometimes, with 4% never, 15 rarely, 19 often, and nobody always.
I think that's pretty typical for an institution of higher education, where we are definitely making progress though with, you know, way more than 50% who feel like they are getting some student engagement with community members around the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's awesome. Okay.
And I'll just say, Kelly, before you go on, that we're going to come back to those ideas again, but that was meant to just really kind of spark some kind of thinking and dialogue about those interconnections that are so critical to this work.
Yeah, thank you. And in just a minute, we're going to move on to our student panel. But even before we do that, I would like for you to go back to your Jamboard screen. And at the top of that window, you'll see a right arrow. And if you click on the right arrow, you'll move to page 2 of that Jamboard. At the top of page 2, it says effective approaches to increasing student youth leadership. And at any time during our student presentations, if you have ideas that you'd like to post there, please feel free to do that. You can just grab a sticky note again and put any ideas that you can think of on that Jamboard. Again, the link to the Jamboard is in the chat if you need to grab that again. Okay. So Heather, I think you can take it away. Introduce yourself and then go for it.
Yeah, lovely. All right. My name is Heather Corzin. I am a Mary Baldwin University student. I'm an undergraduate senior this year. And I also am an SSV intern, and I was head of the planning committee of our first, but planning on being annual, 2022 Student Sustainability Summit, which we hosted almost a calendar year from today. And so we wanted to create an academic conference that was for students by students in order to showcase the different types of student research and student projects that were going on within the Shenandoah Valley, while also helping students build those thoughtful connections to the Sustainable Development Goals, even though their problem or their project or research might not have been conceptualized with the Sustainable Development Goals in mind. So really building those connections and focusing on educating. And so this was a collaborative effort between Net Impact Mary Baldwin University, which is my organization at my school, and the Sustainable Shenandoah Valley as a whole. And so we planned it for about a calendar year, and our goals ended up being met through our 11 undergraduate presentations that were centered around really specific sustainable development goals. So we had every student who applied to present make sure that their project aligned with a particular goal. And so, through that process, we were getting students to explore the SDGs just by trying to figure out which one best aligned, to sort of generate conversation over, oh, which one do you think our project specifically aligns to? And then, having multiple ones and having to pick one and having to weigh the benefits of this and that and the other. And we got some really, really interesting student presentations centered around this sort of core crux of the SDGs. We had presentations that covered carbon sequestration efforts. We had, Trevor's going to talk about in a bit, we had his urban heat island mapping project he presented at the summit. We had a university climate action plan and also supporting local homeless populations. We really kind of had a variety within our set of presentations. And we also had 10 local impact organization sponsors who were for-profit and nonprofit organizations that we specifically invited to sponsor us, because we wanted to make sure that only organizations with demonstrated missions relating to sustainability or the UN SDGs were included in our sort of networking with the students during the event. We didn't want to have any sort of greenwashy type companies trying to, improve their image by being involved with the summit. We wanted to specifically invite local organizations with demonstrated missions. And part of the reason why we did this was to provide a chance for students to really connect with the local community and to demonstrate how this work on the Sustainable Development Goals was being done by different types of organizations. So we wanted to bring together, we have, if I'm an attendee, I'm a student, and I have, some organizing background with an environmental club, I can go and see how people are approaching very similar issues from the nonprofit sector or from the for-profit sector or from, a research perspective. If I run into an engineering student from JMU and just kind of seeing how, we all might be sort of gathered together around maybe a particular issue, but there's so many different ways of approaching it. And it was a really, really great event. We really kind of felt the impact of how student-led efforts can inspire other students. This entire program, although sponsored, facilitated by SSV, was primarily organized through the efforts of me and other undergraduate students. So it really was a student event for students. And we had some really, really great outcomes. We had networking across campus compost initiatives. I got a chance to talk to some people from EMU who had a really, really interesting compost initiative. I was trying to start one. And so we were kind of sharing tips and ideas and different strategies for that. And we also really saw the importance of partnership development across campuses between students who would never otherwise had the chance to meet and talk with each other, and also with non-governmental organizations, community organizations. We saw JMU students who were working on a microplastics remediation device for waterways ended up becoming connected to a Shenandoah River organization, just as one example. So it was really great to see, sort of an intergenerational, interworld kind of collaboration come out from that event. And we are planning on having this event be yearly. In fact, the second one is going to come up in almost exactly a week. It's going to be on April 1st. And every year it's going to be hosted by a different Sustainable Shenandoah Valley University institution. So this year it's going to be at Eastern Mennonite University. Maybe next year it'll be at JMU. But we're really excited to see where it goes from here.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, hopefully we'll have some time for some dialogue about the really just outstanding initiative you took with colleagues on that event. But let's turn it over to Trevor Brooks, who Heather referred to from Bridgewater College, to talk about the sustainable development in action. Sorry, and also the Heat Island work that he has led.
Yes, thank you, Steve. So, hi, my name is Trevor Brooks. I'm a double major political science and environmental science here at Bridgewater College. And I also interned with SSV last semester. But before that, bear with me, we're going to go back to the summer of 2021, where I conducted the Heat Watch project. And this project was really cool for a couple of reasons. One, it was all about community engagement. And so what we did was we wanted to map the urban heat island effect, which for those of you that don't know, that's this phenomenon where urban centers are hotter than their surrounding world counterparts. And to do that, we went directly to local community members, and we asked, where is it the hottest in Harrisonburg, right? And they helped inform the routes, and then we even got them to drive the routes 3 times during one of the hot days of the summer. Here on the left is an image of 2 of our volunteers attaching the sensors onto the cars, and it was really cool. And you could see that they had a lot of energy about being engaged in this kind of project. After it was done, a lot of them, emailed me after, what's next? What's happening next? So just seeing that level of energy was really cool. But the real reason why I'm bringing up Heat Watch is because at the beginning of that project, I had no idea what the Sustainable Development Goals really even were, or how my project related to it. I knew vaguely that the UN had goals, but I never really saw myself as being a part of meeting them. There were some top-down, far-away kind of goals. And then during the course of this project, and through meeting, Heather and Steve, and really hearing about the goals, that kind of flipped. And so it was a really interesting phenomenon where I realized I've been working towards this from the very beginning without even realizing it. And a lot of colleagues that I've talked to and a lot of students feel the same exact way. And all they need is a little explanation of what the sustainability goals are to realize, oh my God, I've been working towards these the entire time. And so the second big thing about Heat Watch was the community engagement. And so this was the beginning of this kind of pseudo network of getting people interconnected to meet these top-down goals from these bottom-up processes. Which brings me to my next slide, if you want to go to the next slide. Which was the Sustainable Development in Action conference, which I hosted with Steve Grande and SSV as an intern. And this was this grand idea to get different stakeholders in the same room. So it was not necessarily as student driven as Heather's sustainability summit, but it was really getting, businesses, politicians, our vice mayor was there, NGOs, the public work department, academics, students, all in the same room, and say, how do we as a community band together to meet these top-down goals? And the event was a huge success. We had many more people than I thought would show up originally. Credit to the energy that is in Harrisonburg. And something and I want to tell an anecdote bringing this back to higher education. After the event was done, about 45 minutes later, we're packing up. We're rolling the chairs back into the closet and putting the chairs away, all this kind of stuff. There's a table with like 10 students. I think Heather was a part of this table. 10 students talking super adamantly about everything that they just heard. And, not only talking, but planning for new things that they can do for these cross-campus connections. And just seeing that sort of energy and dynamics in such a young population was really, really awesome to see. And I think it shows maybe my general takeaway message that there are a lot of kids that have a lot of energy that want to meet these goals. They just don't necessarily have the know-how or the connections. And that's one of the big important things that this Sustainable Development in Action conference was meant to build a formalized network that would allow, students, academics, businesses to reach out to each other and say, look, we're working on, SCG number 1, 2, and 3, and so are you guys. So let's let's foster this connection and really work together and share information, because connections, it's kind of like a fire. You have to build it, but then you also have to sustain it. You can't just let it, die out. And so a lot of those students, they needed this direction because they had the fire in them. They just needed kind of direction. And I am happy to say that we did sustain this energy, and has resulted in a couple of different cross-campus interactions, including a partnership between the JMU Environmental Science Club and the Bridgewater Environmental Science Club, where we now host events together every now and then. And when we host these events, we frame it around these sustainable development goals, and how do we as students meet them. And so not only should bringing the sustainability goals be up to the teachers necessarily or the professors, it should also be really student-led, or a student-led aspect of it as well. And so thank you for listening to me. I tried to keep it brief, and so I'll turn it back over to Steve. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Trevor and Heather. I mean, just a reflection and a question. I mean, one thing I definitely noticed that you both alluded to is the power of peer-to-peer influence, and that exists on all levels, whether it's student to student, faculty member to faculty member, community, right? It's just, you all are going to be in some ways much more effective in talking to your peers than perhaps I will be. That seems like a connection that I think is important to note, and also that that you also by being in these multi-institutional contexts, you're taking this additional leadership when you're talking to peers at other institutions. That I get the sense that in some ways change the way that you were experiencing your level of leadership and participation. But my question, and so you can react to that and tell me if I'm on board there, if I'm off base. My question also for you is, like, how did you get connected? Because one of the things on the Jamboard, someone put in a post that said, recommend particular students who you think will be a good fit. I mean, how did you find out you were a good fit? How did you get to this place of being empowered to take this on?
Yeah, that was my Jamboard response.
Oh.
Yeah, so my sophomore year of university, I ended up declaring my major as a business major with an emphasis in sustainability. And I set up my first meeting with Dr. Kong, who's down there, who's in this call. And she recommended me to reach out to SSV to see if I could intern for you guys, and also to see if I wanted to be the president of our Net Impact Club that was being sort of restarted on campus after a period of inactivity. And so just sort of from, being open to that idea and being like honored that I was like, oh yeah, I mean, I'd love to do that. I just kind of said yes. But I think we've also seen with students, student presenters, when we're reaching out to try to get people to, submit their project to present at the summit, they have a tendency to be far more receptive if a specific professor is advocating for them to apply for the presentation. It's just, if you have a really specific connection where somebody is kind of like validating that, yes, your abilities are enough and you should do this and your project is good enough. I think sometimes we sort of feel a bit of imposter syndrome where we feel like we're not like qualified, or we shouldn't try because we're just going to fail. But if somebody is like, no, you're interested in this, you should lead this, you have the power to do that, that can just be really helpful and inspiring.
Yeah, I felt similarly to Heather. It was really helpful. My professor kind of nudged me along the way and kind of sought me out for this, and it might not have been something that I would have necessarily jumped into had it not been for having a little bit of push, a little shove, as they say. But I think also for me, it was really about having an interest in being interdisciplinary. And so a lot of the people that I meet and I interact with, at least at my institution, everyone wants to save the world, but they want to save it in their own specific kind of way. And so, there's not a lot of willingness for, let's say a biology major to go and talk to an environmental science major or a political science major for that matter. And I think one of the biggest things for me that helped kind of pushed me into moving into towards a more, obviously I'm a double major political science, environmental science, but I wasn't originally. And one of the things that kind of helped me along on that path was my professor sitting me down and kind of explaining to me how important interdependence and interdisciplinary action really is, especially in terms of meeting these overarching goals from a bottom up process.
Great. Yeah, Trevor, we like to call those nudges, not shoves, just so you know. But but yeah, definitely. But just I think so many of the folks on this call today also would have had the experience where when you've done that nudging, how rewarding, but also it's a form of scholarship for faculty as well. And it really rejuvenates us when we do these kinds of things, and turning over that leadership made both your programs so much stronger. So I just can't tell you just all on a kind of more of a qualitative level what it felt like to attend both these events. And so I really appreciate Heather and Trevor's work. And so they're going to hang around, and if we have time later on, we'll rope them back into the conversation. But we want to turn it over now to two faculty members, Dr. Bayo Angudipe and Dr. Jin Young Kang, who are here. And we're going to start with Bayo, and who will introduce himself and talk a little bit about his work of integrating the Sustainable Development Goals. He does that in multiple ways. We don't have time to get into all of those, but he'll at least get started with that, and we'll have some time hopefully for some question and answers too. So thank you, Bayo.
Thanks, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bayo Gundipe. I am a professor and the department head of engineering at James Madison University. My background is in chemical engineering and environmental engineering. I grew up in Nigeria, where, I started off as a chemical engineer, and then, kind of realized that, engineers have a responsibility to actually do better in terms of our contribution to the development. We were actually doing some harm along the way. So getting into environmental engineering was kind of, it made sense to me at the time. But also I found out later on that, a lot of the environmental engineering practice was really after the fact, right? After the fact of the impact on the harm. So I needed a reorientation of how to actually approach this work from a much more preventive perspective. So the work I'll talk about today is really this collaboration between me and Dr. Tim Thomas, who is in the College of Education. Now, the Jamboard is an interesting thing, because if you take a look at the Jamboard, I mentioned there that my the Sustainable Development Goal that actually resonates most with me is number 17. I actually think that it's the most critical one, this partnership for achieving the goals. Each one of those goals, they're there. I mean, there are different dimensions to each one of those, but I still feel like if we do not figure out how to work together across multiple disciplines, we would always struggle with real solutions and real sustainable solutions to any of those challenges. So as far as we know, this collaboration is the only one of its kind, where the folks from engineering are actually working with folks in education in a particular course. So what we have here is the education students take the course for required credit. The engineering students take it for elective credits. And it started from a conversation that we had when we're talking about the SDGs, and we realized that one thing that is missing, and I think someone mentioned that earlier on, I apologize because I probably looked away, but the idea that a lot of students get exposure to the SDGs usually when they're in college, right? And by that time, you're trying to explain concepts that in reality, they should have been exposed to a lot earlier. So we're thinking about how do we make the SDGs part of the curriculum such that students actually have access to the SDGs in the K through 12 system. And so Dr. Thomas talked about potentially helping potential future educators to find ways to actually develop modules that they can integrate into the K-12 classroom environment that actually incorporates the SDGs. And I said, well, one thing that I'm trying to get engineering students to have better access to is to really understand the limitations of technical solutions to a lot of problems. Engineering students always go in, it's like you have a hammer and everything you see is a nail. So you're going to actually apply your technical skills, which are useful for a lot of things, but a lot of things are actually outside of the technical solutions realm. And those things usually involve talking to people. It usually involves collaborating with people and interacting with people. So we decided that we'll actually teach this course that would essentially build around community involvement, community participation in projects. And so we would use some of the tools that are accessible to engineering students and some of the tools that education students may also bring to the table. And so far, it's been working well. We're actually running the course this particular semester. One of the interesting things that we've been talking about in the last couple of weeks is the concept of stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders in any particular project? Who should be involved? What should be the scope and scale? Should you open the door to everyone? How would you actually involve the public? A really good one that I think is actually relevant is the idea of the impact that poverty plays in getting real robust participation in the community, right? And so you might be trying to solve a problem, for example, that addresses poverty, but the stakeholders are the people that actually are most impacted by poverty. But then it's also that impact that's making it difficult for them to actually participate in the project, at least in conversations about the project. So you have this challenging situation here. And so the students have to sit down and actually figure out and think about what are the different ways, what are the different tools that they can use to actually integrate people in the community. So kind of really figuring out how do you go from models of non-participation to models of true citizen power, right? Where people are actually empowered. Non-participation typically is where you just go in and tell people, here's the solution, this is good for you, take it, right? And then with true citizen power is that you've engaged them from the grassroots, from the very foundation of the problem, the scoping of the problem, and the solutions of the problem. They've been part of that particular problem. How do you navigate this? So these are things that we don't actually teach in typical curricula, at least not in engineering. And I know that that's not the case in education as well. So this gives us an opportunity to actually go outside of the general comfort zone of both disciplines to do this. And then the most important part is that we can get together and think about solutions to problems and involve the public and the community. But how do we actually translate those solutions that we're coming up with to actually actionable things, especially within the constraints of politics, of social or economic factors as well. So it's been a great process so far. One of the very early challenges that we have was that we understood that we would be coming in two different students from two different disciplines with different ways of communicating. So what we've been trying to do so far, an example of that, what we've tried to do to minimize the challenges of communication is to use an old engineering trick, which is that we just draw everything. So we use, so rather than talk too much, whenever there's a concept, so you can look at any of the concepts of the SDGs, for example, and it could mean different things to different people. So we just ask the students to draw. So we do a graphic jam. Each person draws what it means to them, and then they work together in teams to try to incorporate everyone's perspective into a bigger visual representation. And then they talk about it to the class, and people get a better understanding rather than allowing each group to come in with their own jargon. But so it's worked well so far. Our big project coming up is going to be around food in the Valley, which is it's one that a lot of people can relate to. So we chose that. The food systems are really complex, and anyone who's actually worked in this would tell you that and would understand that there's a lot there. And there's so many stakeholders, and it touches on so many aspects of the SDGs, from water to poverty, to hunger, to equality. So there's so much associated with that. So that's kind of where we are right now. And I think my time is up, so I'll pause and hope for questions.
Thanks, Bayo. Yeah, you're just getting warmed up. So we're gonna have time for some Q&A because there's so much deeper we can go. I also like how you got into speaker mode there the last 10 seconds. And but yeah, there's a lot we want to follow up on there. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're gonna head over to Dr. Jin Young Kang to talk about another perspective on integrating sustainable development goals into the curriculum. And I forgot to mention, but there is that third slide of the Jamboard that if you want to just talk about some examples you've seen or questions you have, you can also post those in the chat too. But there's something that dynamic that sometimes happens in those settings when we start putting things out there. So please feel free to make this interactive. Okay, I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Kang.
Hello, hi everyone. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. My name is Jin Young Kang. I'm assistant professor at Mary Baldwin University, and particularly teaching sustainability last 5 years. And I think I have to say that I was very lucky to working with Mary Baldwin to teaching sustainability, because as you know, a lot of business school do not really facilitate it like sustainability as a like mainstream of curriculum. So in that sense, I was very lucky to only focusing on teaching and research in the areas of the sustainability. So my research topic is focusing on the gender issue, which is UN SDG 5, gender inequality. So because so I was looking at 3 dimensions of how me as an instructor, how am I integrating this SDG go into 3 dimensions. So the first one is the teaching dimensions. So for example, I've been teaching different the types of the curriculums in the areas of the sustainability, but I wanna bring out one of the example which the final project. Of course, I'm using the textbook for this class, but for the final project, I was using WikiRate, which is the platform data. They're providing all different the data, ESG data for CSR, corporate social responsibility, you know, the company's CSR or sustainability report. So for final research project, consulting project, I asked the students to select one of their company and digging into their CSR report, but particularly looking at gender dimensions, how those company has describing their responsibility towards gender inequality. And WikiRate is a great platform providing those the website. So I contact the director of a WikiRate platform, and the director walk us through those how to using it and then how to using those data. And at the end of this using the final project, the students has to come up with the consulting recommendations that whether evaluating like for example, like Samsung CSR report, you know, they have to come up with their recommendations. And then number 2, for the research, because my research topic is looking at the gender issues and then what is the responsibility of the corporations. And right now, the header who was the student speakers in before, we are working on this research paper on what is the role of those companies on gender inequality during the COVID. As you know, during the COVID, the gender inequality in the US has been deepens and increased. So right now we're looking at, again, looking at the CSR report of these US companies, Fortune 500, and how those companies disclosing their CSR data on around the gender inequality, so which is related to the UN SDG goal 5, gender inequality. So lastly, I am believer in that providing the extra resources is really important to the students outside of those textbook or classroom is really important to grasp the ideas of the UN SDG goal and sustainability. So I'm a faculty advisor of the net impact since I was working on the Mary Baldwin University. And right now we're trying to adapting these UN SDG goals and trying to implementing those events around that UN 17 SDG goals through the event, such as film, watching it, panel discussions, or bring the guest speakers. So net impact is, those of you who don't know about net impact, is one of those the NGO and student clubs that focusing on sustainability. Okay, I guess that's about it for now.
Thank you, Dr. Kang. Right. And I believe Net Impact has chapters, I think, is it globally, or I don't know if it's just right?
Yes, so it started from West Coast, California. I believe they stay based in California, and it's NGO, but now it become a global. And the impact is mainly hosted by business departments in the university, but there's MBA and there's professional chapters. So pretty much, I believe that most of the business school in the US has for those the impact chapter.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Kang. And thank you to all our panelists. And so now we have an opportunity to open it up for dialogue. And so earlier there was a comment from Jay Bassett. Jay, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, but you were, I think, were responding to something that Dr. Angundipe said about just these bringing groups together, but also not just the trust issues in the classroom between, say, education and engineering, but also in the community. And making such a good point around that. And so that was, I think, an excellent addition to that conversation. So we can build on that, or we can go in another direction, but I want to open it up for questions, reactions, and dialogue.
Yeah, I could also add to that in fact, the trust issue actually ended up taking all of up to 3 class periods because it's such a critical one that the students identified to be a significant factor in actually once you start working with anyone in the community. And so one of the things that we've tried to do to help them in some ways build their own sense of confidence as well, but also to try to understand what they might face in terms of when they go into a community and how it is very challenging to come into a community with an idea and not have to contend with the fact that people are seeing you and wondering why you actually coming to talk to me about this particular topic in the first place. And so we've had them actually do some mini projects here on campus, which is more familiar to them, but still they've actually had to face those same challenges, right? When they're actually going out to actually talk to people about some things that may actually matter to certain people. Sometimes people ask them, why are you asking me this? What is this about? Right. And so if you're looking at a community where they've definitely been historical issues, then it's even more amplified in that context. And so, yes, I think it's an impediment to, it's a challenge, let me put it that way. It's a challenge to partnering together for any kind of problem solving. And we have to be aware of the historical factors in any community that we're working with, and the kinds of, what's the best way to put it? What, by our own presences in those communities, what we represent, what we're coming with. And so, if we're not schooled in those, then we're going to do more harm than good. But it still goes back again to really understanding who even are the stakeholders, because sometimes in some of these projects, there are people that are not actually they're not well-meaning. They participate as stakeholders, but they really are not well-meaning. And it's only later on you realize that they infiltrated that whole process in the first place just to discredit it. And so those kinds of things did come up. But again, this is, at least from engineering students, this is kind of all different. This is very different stuff. We're not actually used to really having to navigate these social, cultural challenges. And for real good problem solving, they just have to know these things.
I want to invite others to join the conversation, which you can do just by jumping in, or if you feel better, you can raise your hand.
Steve, we have a
Yeah.
question under the Q&A.
Right. Do you, I can read it, or unless you're getting ready to, Carolina.
Oh, you go ahead.
Oh, thank you. This is from Lane. I might be Frazi. Dr. Agudipe, I'd love to hear more about how students respond to these conversations around engaging with community stakeholders from the beginning. Are they on board? Is there resistance or struggle? What examples or best practices are you pulling from to show why this is essential? So you were starting to already touch on that, but if you want to elaborate at all there.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So I think initially the students they don't know what to make of this. At least for the engineering students are not really sure what to make of this. What is this about? And why do we even have to do this? So it's not that they're resistant to it. They do struggle. I think that's the reality. They do struggle. The educational students they seem a little bit more attuned to this, to understanding this. I think that's generally part of their training. But one of the things that we did very early on is to point to a number of historical problems that people tried to solve without engaging stakeholders, and how they became catastrophic. And there are a lot of case studies about that. Some of them within the very, very clearly technical realm. The seatbelt is a classic example of one of those, where a lot of the testing that was done with the seatbelts did not actually use female body models, right? And so a lot of women were just disproportionately dying from car crashes, even when they had the seatbelt on, simply because those were just not included in that. And that's just one example. But there are a lot of cases like that. There's the case of the Tellico Dam, the Tennessee River Authority Dam, where some stakeholders were involved, not all the right stakeholders were involved. They built the dam halfway, realized that they were making a mistake. So there are so many things, there's so many examples of that. And I think that kind of set of case studies does bring to light the relevance of actually talking to people and trying to get it right from the beginning. But the struggle, I would say, is really more from the fact that I think as a society in general, people are way too reserved. People fear talking to other people, I think. That's so whenever there's the expectation that you're going to go out and actually talk to people and ask people and get them involved and talk to them about things, I think there's definitely a little bit of some hesitation there. But so far, it seems to be working well.
Thanks. Lane, did you want to add anything or follow up before we go to Jay?
No, that was great. I was just about to write a thank you in the chat. Yeah, great to hear about. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for your question too. I think it's getting at the heart of this, but also this conversation, as we get deeper, I think it just gets richer and richer. Jay, please.
Yeah, hey, Jay Bassett here. So kind of my role today in this is I'm actually supporting one of the community-based organizations with Georgia Tech Serve, Learn, Sustain. So I want to maybe give you some different perspectives as we look at this, because trust me, I've taken some of those students to bring them into some of the community-based work we're doing as a fabric of the community. And I think the key thing is when you look at, in this case, Georgia Tech Serve, Learn, Sustain, it's really an entity that's specifically designed to work with communities in a very specific way. So as we bring students in, as we do things like, most recently, last month, we did an asset-based community development workshop for a community to bring its assets together for economic redevelopment effort for an old equalization school, that we make sure we're engaging and already have those relationships already built within these community organizations, so that as the students go out there and do this work, that it's truly authentic. We're not just saying, oh, the student, you got to go out there and build these relationships, that there's a mechanism and a process for doing that. Every time we bring a community member on campus to talk to students about their story that they're going to engage with, that community member is reimbursed for their time, right? So when I talk about the series of set of principles of engaging on a value-based approach with communities to make sure their time and the engagement with the university or with the institution is truly authentic and is there to be part in a way that meets them where they are and will help them, versus someone coming in to say, let me tell you what you need to do. And I think we need to be really cautious on that, because that's when those trust issues come up. If they think someone's going to come in here, and I did this with the agency for many years, you know, we would do local food, local places with EPA's community revitalization program. Great bunch of city planners, they'd come in and develop a great plan for local foods. And then as soon as that plan was done, they left. And what do you think happened to that plan? Well, it ended up on the shelf and nothing ever came out of it. And then from there on, the view of the agency was they came and left, and that's all we got out of it. So I think we have to be very thoughtful on these types of engagement and really have that center of expertise that brings those anthropologists, you know, in a technical school, and can be really meaningful and intentional in that engagement with students. So it's not only productive for the student and what they learn, but it's actually productive in meeting the communities that where they want, that goes beyond needs, but really looking at how do you build opportunities to address root problems, right? We don't want to come in there and just put a Band-Aid on something. We want it to be something that would sustain. So anyway, that was the context of this trust conversation. The last thing I will tell you, as an ex-government employee that did a lot of work on this around Brownsfield, it would take 9 months as just someone that says, I'm going to give you money. I got money to give you. It would take 9 months to have a conversation with someone that would actually listen. That's how long it takes sometimes.
Yeah, those are great stories and cautions. And I don't know if those principles are actually articulated by the Serve, Learn, Sustain folks at Georgia Tech or not, but it would be great, to get those and to share them. So maybe we can talk offline about that. That'd be great, or talk to Jenny or, but that I think also gets at a conversation we were having in the planning for the Sustainable Shenandoah Valley folks about this webinar. Just it comes at kind of this idea of problem solving, and particularly in engineering, but this transcends that. I think it's also just an impulse that might be more common of perhaps students. You want to like, okay, I'm in this class, I want to solve this problem. And so there's that orientation. But then at the same time too, like going back to some of the things that impressed me so much about what RCE Georgetown is doing, they have a dashboard that is showing how are we doing, what kind of progress are we making? We need to see progress, right? So, so I think there is a tension there. I'm just curious reactions from our panelists, others, about the tension between, yes, we have to build trust, and there's a sense of hopelessness amongst youth right now, and a sense of betrayal, right? That we're being left with some unsolvable problems. So we need to see progress at the same time. So folks have thoughts about balancing that tension.
Steve, I'll say that what has been most gratifying for me is that when you embed students in community, I'm sure all of the presenters who are just so fantastic today, and maybe the students too can confirm this, but I feel like our students felt a connection with the community. Now, building trust in community doesn't happen overnight, but generally the communities within which we have worked have had a lot of older people engaged, so retirees, et cetera. And they've kind of taken on a parental role in some cases with the students, which is lovely because many students are away from home. So there's a sort of sense of bonding that I think happens. And it also helps our students realize that they're not alone, and that the university is a part of a larger community, and that while they may be frustrated, there's other people out there that are frustrated too, but they're doing something together about it. And that they're not going to find all the answers right away.
So I found that the community members really buttress me in a big way. They're a huge help to me. And I think including in like a mental health capacity for the students, they're just great soundboards and mentors in many, many ways. Yes, I agree. Intergenerational learning. Yep.
I'm just looking to see if Trevor and Heather were nodding or not, because that as you described that, Pam, that kind of reminded me of some of the experiences that Trevor and Heather have had.
Yeah, if I could, just say something. I know for me, in Harris, so I've had two experiences. So I've had the experience in Harrisonburg, which is for those that don't know, maybe a smaller city, and then I've gone and had some experiences out in Austin, Texas, doing research out there. And what I found was the community that I worked with in Harrisonburg was much more, together and much more kind of. It felt like I was almost walking into something that was already happening, right? And then just helping it move along. Whereas in Austin, it was kind of the opposite. This stuff was just starting to get going, and there was a lot of distrust between, like the community and the, even UT Austin or the city of Austin, right? And so a lot of what they were doing was trying to build trust initially, and then how do we meet some of the issues. So I guess I've walked both sides of the tracks, and it's definitely I would say it's probably easier with the Harrisonburg when it was already kind of moving along, but Harrisonburg also had kind of these established community groups that were already somewhat linked together and had a lot of intergenerational kind of connections in and of themselves, whereas Austin was a little bit I guess fractured might be a better word, where there wasn't a lot of intercommunity or interorganization communication.
Yeah, and I think that in Stanton with Mary Baldwin University as well, we're sort of still in that process of building those connections and having those inroads. I know there's some outreach efforts on campus with some specific like community service classes. I'm a part of a VITA income tax class that works with community members. And so that's been the most significant interaction beyond the summit that I've been able to have with the Stanton community. So I think that there really is a need, especially at Mary Baldwin University, to kind of have those sort of like working together moments, maybe like longer term partnerships, because we have a big event like the summit and that might happen every year, but it's only one day out of the year. And so yeah, I think that we definitely have a need of that in Stanton as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you all. I mean, I think this gets, I think, really at the relationship between relationship building, the trust, and how foundational that is. And thank you, Lane, for your comment in the chat. We have to find that. That sounds like a great presentation. That the foundation of trust, at the same time that we bring our assets together, hence the asset-based community development piece, right? That there's something magical that happens where the deeper we get into the problem. And so when students are actually experiencing the complexity, and in some ways you'd think that they become more hopeless, but paradoxically, as they're joining with the community, it's kind of like, okay, I'm with these other people, as Pam said, so they're buttressed by that in some ways. Last chance here before we close up to get a comment in.
Hey, this is Jay Bass. I want to just make one follow-up. The asset-based community development has been really, I think, a really effective focusing on community strengths, and so much so that, quite frankly, I've been working to actually embed that and include that. That's from my folks at US EPA before I retired as part of their environmental justice grant program. That's the $2.8 billion IRA fund that's coming out. So when you see the next release, those principles are actually embedded in some of the programs that will be offered. So I appreciate being part of the conversation in the community on this.
Well, thank you all for a great just 2 hours of really inspiring work. And I want to keep the conversation going because it's really energetic. But thank you all, and just round of applause for everyone who participated and contributed throughout today. Daita, what do you want to leave us with?
Well, good job, everyone, and thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to continuing this type of engagement at the next session. The recording will be available in the platform, but the chat unfortunately doesn't. There is a glitch, so I will share the link to the other recording in the lobby chat so that people can also see the chat. But yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for being here and contributing. And I'll also grab the link from the Jamboard to share with everyone who wasn't here today.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Thank
High
you.
fives.
Thanks,
See you at
everyone.
the next session. Bye.
Bye-bye.